Hello, everybody, and welcome to another edition of the Knicks Film School Pregame Show. My name is Andrew Claudio, a.k.a. GMAC, and it is time for another late night action, a preview of some late action. I just realized it sounded like I'm previewing that we're going to talk about. No, we're going to talk about a basketball game, and that's specifically nothing else that's going to have some late night action. Although you can still hang out with me and John Macri late night tonight after the Knicks play the Sacramento Kings at Golden One Center. The second time the Knicks will play the Kings in, I believe, a calendar month. They played them sometime either at the end of January or the beginning of February. These games sort of mesh together. And these two teams do have something in common, even if the Knicks' big trades were made in the offseason. The Kings, almost a week and a half after the last time the Knicks played them, made one of the biggest trades in their franchise's history, trading De'Aaron Fox to the San Antonio Spurs. The other thing that these two teams have in common is that they're missing one of their better players. The Knicks obviously will continue life without Jalen Brunson in this matchup. And the Kings, unfortunately, lost Domantas Sabonis for a little bit. So we'll find out how the Kings have been doing without Domantas Sabonis. They may also be without Malik Monk, who's had a toe injury over the past few days. So we'll see. And you might think that spells a recipe for success, or at least the Knicks caught a break because they're not playing against Sabonis or Malik Monk. But let me just read some lineup data since they've made this trade. So all I did was go to Clean the Glass and put Zach LaVine on the court and then take De'Aaron Fox and Domantas Sabonis off the court. So this is even saying potentially that Malik Monk plays tonight. The starting five of Keon Ellis, Zach LaVine, Keegan Murray, DeMar DeRozan, and Jonas Valanciunas. That's right. Valanciunas is now a King, by the way. Plus 24 and 138 possessions in the near 560 possessions since with just Zach LaVine on. And if you take Domantas Sabonis and De'Aaron Fox out of the equation, the Sacramento Kings are plus 16 with a very, very good offensive rating. Very bright orange, I should say, according to Clean the Glass. So the Kings come in a team. Yes, they're sitting here at 7th in offense and 10th in net rating. But this is a team that looks very different than the last time the Knicks played them, which is why what I like to do with these pregame pods is get a different guest the second time around. But the first time I had this gentleman on, Sacramento Kings looked one way, and then he told me some stuff, and then all that stuff happened, and now we're going to talk about it again to see what happened. Joining me from Sactown Sports, Mr. Brenden Nunes, returning guest, our Kings expert. Brenden, how you doing, man?
I'm doing well, Andrew. Thanks for having me on. I will say I never realized in the intro that we still got RJ, we still got IQ in here. I love the wide range.
So it's a countdown of sorts. So until another Nick wears number 9 that matters more than RJ, or a Nick wears number 5. Like right now, Precious Achiuwa, I believe, wears number 5. No disrespect to Precious, but Emmanuel Quick means a lot more than me. I will say I've been getting some pushback from, I will say, but this is probably more earlier in the year when Knicks fans liked Josh Hart, that Josh Hart should replace John Starks in the countdown. And I said, like, I get it. Josh Hart has some playoff moments. John Starks started finals games for the Knicks at one point. And was a 3-pointer away from winning a finals for the Knicks in Game 6 against the Rockets. I understand everybody associates him with Game 7. But yeah, well, potentially, I'm not going to rule it out that one day maybe another number 9 or another number 5 will come along. For the first version of that countdown, number 1 was Obi for a little bit, and then we went back to Amari Stoudemire. Scintillating conversation. I know Knicks fans want to hear, especially the hear part where they didn't get to see the countdown. But this is how we generate the buzz at the top of the pod for a show that is previewing a game 8.5 hours from now for those of us here on the East Coast that'll stay up until 10:30 for this start. And it's against the Kings team. And I guess we'll start with like what's happened to the Kings since then. That just flatly looks very different than the last time the Knicks played them. When you and I did that pod in, I think it was mid-February, we got off the air and we discussed a little bit about, like, the conversation was more about when they fired Mike Brown, the uptick that they were playing with, the surge post hiring of Doug Christie, what led to his firing, and all of that stuff. and it's stuff that you then reported, but the indication or the inclination that you gave me was that the end could be near after the season for De'Aaron Fox, if not sooner. And within a couple days, he had asked out of Sacramento. So if you can educate my audience who hasn't been paying attention to what's been going on in Sacramento and why that relationship eventually ended, plain and simple, why did the relationship end in Sacramento for De'Aaron Fox?
Yeah, it's sort of long and complicated, 7.5 years with the organization. And it's funny, actually. I mean, this is probably the most I've been split with the fan base, and people aren't the most happy with everything that I'm necessarily saying all the time because everybody is very much turned on De'Aaron Fox. But I'll say my perspective is that, from the outside, especially, I'd imagine that it's very easy to see the dysfunction that the Kings had for a decade and a half at very least. And De'Aaron,
maybe longer. Yeah.
And De'Aaron powered through a lot of that. And I thought was a good sport throughout most of it. And eventually got to a point where he was just a little bit over all the turnover, and he's reaching his prime. He's 27, 28 years old. And it's like, legacy starts to come into play going into his third contract. He's also a hyper athletic guard. And honestly, those guys tend to have a very quick fall off in their careers at times. So I think that plays a part here a little bit. He's also a guy that deals with nagging injuries here and there for what it's worth. But he essentially told the team in the offseason, when they were debating if they were going to bring back Mike Brown, which I thought was a questionable decision, that, hey, I want to play for Mike Brown. This is De'Aaron Fox talking to the front office. And he said that if I play for another coach, it will be with a different organization. And mid-season, when the Kings had lost, I want to say it's 5-6 games in a row. And ironically, the final game of that is Kings are up 3. Pistons have the ball. De'Aaron Fox fouls a 3-point shooter. Jaden Ivey, a little added irony there for the Kings with taking Keegan Murray over Jaden Ivey. And they end up losing that game on a 4-point play. That's De'Aaron's fault. Mike Brown gets fired the day after. Essentially, there was no conversation that was had with De'Aaron Fox leading up to the Mike Brown firing, when he had previously told them, hey, if you let go of Mike, pretty much I'm done. And there was no conversation prior to that happening. There was no conversation after the fact about the firing with De'Aaron. And they also did not hold a press conference. The front office, that is, which is, as you guys would know, very atypical. Everybody does that. And
so just real quick, except the Knicks. Like Leon Rose hasn't spoken to the media since his introductory Zoom in 2020. So there's
2020.
Yeah, like it's a thing that
does anybody talk like post deadline and stuff?
No.
Wow. I didn't know that.
But like this is a specific Knicks thing. Like around the league, they get annoyed. Like on behalf of the Knicks beat, the Leon Rose should speak to the media. So
so
continue.
I guess then yes,
they went full Knicks. Is what it sounds like.
Exactly.
Yeah, we definitely get it. We definitely.
And the whole issue is that there's no clarity on who is the one that like made the decision to move on for Mike Brown. And again, this is a compilation of like a bunch of different things from years prior as well for De'Aaron, of eventually just being over it. But when you don't come out and have the, hey, this was my decision, that Monty McNair eventually did, I want to say like 40 days later, something like that, after the trade deadline moves, specifically the De'Aaron Fox trade. And in that process, publicly, De'Aaron is getting blamed for the Mike Brown firing, as if like he has some weird rift in their relationship. And his response is because Mike Brown was very publicly pushing him through media, that, De'Aaron was feeling a type of way, became the narrative. And I think De'Aaron got fed up with that as well, of hey, why am I the one that has to come out here and defend myself rather than the organization that in his mind he's been loyal to for 7+ years, And there was an instance a couple of years ago, last year prior, I want to say it was, where they lost a really bad game in Boston. They seem to always get their butt kicked in Boston, even though they actually won this year.
Something else Knicks fans can understand.
Fair
getting
enough.
Their butt kicked in Boston. Yes.
Very fair. And they sent Keon Ellis out to post-game media when the guy had played like less than 5 minutes that night, rather than De'Aaron going out there and talking. Well, they didn't ask De'Aaron to talk in that moment. And again, he gets ridiculed on social media. The organization never comes out and defends him. So again, like kind of just two examples, with the Mike Brown one being really the breaking point of all of this. And I think what gets lost in like the whole De'Aaron asked for a trade And why he got fairly defensive on social media and different platforms and things like that is because to him, it's the order of operations, right? It's he got approached by another player in the league being like, hey, why am I being told that, my team is considering trading for you? And then he goes to the front office and it's like, what's going on here? They're like, yeah, we're going to have conversations about moving you. And he responds by saying, well, if that's the case, I want to go to the Spurs. And Kings fans have hard feelings about him controlling the market like that. My perspective is that damn near every star is going to do that throughout the league. And, if you don't want to use the word star for De'Aaron, whatever, I think that he's in that sort of tier of guys that we're talking about. And yeah, I think that was just eventually the point that it was over. I think that he liked Doug Christie as a person, but it was really like the constant turnover. And I think if you look at his preferred destination being the Spurs, this isn't LA, this isn't New York, it's not some huge market. That's a basketball decision. You know what I mean? And obviously having Wembanyama there is a huge plus, but I think that he could not have chosen more of like a stable organization that you can just be hands off and trust. The polar opposite, honestly, of what the Kings have been in his 7.5 years. So he certainly didn't do himself any favors, I would say, with his exit. And, he's always been somebody that responds to things on social media. If he feels like people are spilling false things about him, he's always been that guy. And I will say he's also not always been the greatest leader, I would say, from a vocal standpoint. And I think that's one of Kings fans' frustrations now in hindsight. And my perspective is he was never a guy that was a number one on a championship team. Like, he was the closest thing that they had for sure. So I thought that you kind of had to try for that. But I don't think he was ever that. And he was never like this vocal leader. And I feel like he's getting a lot of crap for that on the way out, for not being something that he never was, essentially. And again, he certainly did not help himself in the eyes of Kings fans throughout this whole process. But his return the other day to Golden One, I believe it was on Friday, ended up being all right. Mixed emotions from the fan base.
So that's one of the, I wrote down several follow-ups because first let's start here. The reception on Friday when the Spurs went to Sacramento and he made his return. I mean, I got to be honest, the Knicks were playing the Clippers and I was watching that, so I missed it completely. But what was the reception? I mean, were you there for it? Did you get the, like, being boots on the ground, what was the reaction or the reception that he got from Kings fans?
Yeah, was in the building. I was a little unsure at shoot around if he was going to fuel the fire at all, because every once in a while he has some comments, but he took the high road. He was like, pretty much I've said my piece. And it was fine. The intros are very funny because Harrison Barnes is also on that team, been a King for a while. Prior to joining the Spurs, he was part of that DeRozan trade, actually. Mm-hmm. He gets a very loud ovation when he gets introduced. And then Chris Paul is introduced next in the starting lineup, who will get booed in any arena he goes into. And so then you go from those boos into De'Aaron Fox, and it actually kind of transitioned into more cheers than what they had for at least CP3, but a mix of boos in there. And then when they played the tribute video, I thought he got a nice ovation, a little standing ovation from the arena. But mid-game, anytime he touched the ball, he was met with a lot of boos.
Yeah,
that's how it should be. It's once the ball goes up, hey, you're on the other team.
The closure of the tribute video is what I've found. And look, this is weird because the Knicks went through, I want to say, a decade where no tribute or return mattered. It was like Melo came back with when Melo came back with the Thunder in 2018, that was like, that night mattered, but it was for a team that wasn't good. And then we went through this stretch of like 5-6 years under Tibbs, or I guess first 3 or 4, where they didn't really trade anybody that mattered. So there was nobody to welcome back. And then the last calendar year, it's like, oh, this is IQ and RJ's first game against the Knicks. This is Obi Toppin's first game against the Knicks. The Randall and DiVincenzo first game was a preseason game a week and a half after the trade happened.
DiVincenzo got a video?
Yeah. DiVincenzo's a playoff hero in New York. Don't forget where he went to school.
Love it.
Like the Villanova thing, your family here in New York. And then you add the Hartenstein video that happened. And what I've seen is that's the last time you officially can have a positive emotion, and then you're officially the enemy. Now, I'm naming guys that weren't all-stars. I guess Julius Randle technically was, but the connection that De'Aaron Fox probably had with Sacramento is a little different. And so clarify, how many head coaches, how many GMs did he play for in Sacramento?
Yeah. If I try to go down the line, top of my head, we have Dave Yeager, we have Luke Walton. Luke Walton gets replaced by Alvin Gentry as an interim. And then we have Mike Brown. So what I'm at 4, and then we go to 5 would be Doug Christie here now.
Okay.
And it was going to be 5 coaches in 7.5 years. And he was on his only second general manager, actually, because Vlade drafted him, and then Monty McNair and Wes Wilcox are the current GMs, which there's also a little bit of a divide there, clearly, with that disagreement on who should be the head coach. And I mean, you could go back to the drafting a bunch of guards in the first round and De'Aaron feeling like, hey, are we going to do something? We need another wing. So definitely not exactly on the same page there either.
Well, that's what makes this so interesting to me is usually you see a coach get fired because of his relationship with the star player. A lot of the times you see that wasn't a connection. Sometimes it's like the front office will side with the player over the head coach. And it sounds like, we talked about the pros and cons of letting Mike Brown go the last time you were here. And like sometimes when a coach loses the team, it's okay to just say, okay, like a new voice in here makes more sense. And in this sense, it's almost like making that like rational decision, a reasonable decision to move on from Mike Brown to Christie, especially since the Kings have been good. Like the record is much better under Doug Christie. And yet it might have also led to the beginning of the end of De'Aaron Fox in almost the opposite direction of how it normally goes.
Well, you kind of, there's other players that, I'm not sure who else was on De'Aaron's side about Mike Brown.
Well, so I don't know if it's publicly out there, but I have heard about some rifts that Sabonis and his family have had with Mike Brown and the back and forths they've had, and why that decision was not, there was no pushback from Sabonis when the Mike Brown firing was what happened when he was let go,
Yeah, I would definitely say so. And Doug Christie, very much a Domantas Sabonis guy. That's the coach that was assigned to him. He was out in Lithuania with him this offseason, actually ended up working out Valanciunas before the trade and everything. But very much Domantas Sabonis wasn't the biggest fan. And I think that caused a little bit of a rift between De'Aaron and Domas, because De'Aaron kind of has the perspective of, hey, bro, like I've been here 7.5 years. Like, you don't understand that like they do this all the time and they need to stop, and Domas has a newer, fresher perspective on this organization. And to your point, they're 21-11 with Doug Christie. And it did feel like they had that Mike Brown had somewhat lost the locker room. I still think Mike Brown is a good coach. I think one of the things that he talked about in his intro presser about trying to change the culture was like needing a horizontal and vertical alignment within the front, between the coaching staff, the front office, ownership. And I think that what we've learned over the course of this season is that could not be further than being the case. But definitely Domantas Sabonis wasn't the biggest Mike Brown fan. And then Malik Monk and Kevin Huerter as well. I think that those guys were vocalizing some of the things that they maybe weren't the biggest fans of. I'm not sure how DeMar DeRozan necessarily sided in this either, or if he even swayed much. I'd kind of just gotten here this year, and I think his thing is like, dude, I just want to compete on some sort of team out here. But I think that rift, and again, mentioned Domas, but Malik Monk in there as well, and everybody paints them as like the bestest of friends, and I don't know that was always the case. Not that they like despise each other or anything like this, but the picture that was painted, I think, led people to think other things were sort of going on with this dynamic.
So what's interesting now, if I can compare this to the Knicks' current situation, where like 40-23, sitting here at third in the Eastern Conference, by all accounts, the scoreboard says this has been a good season. This before Jalen Brunson got hurt, they were probably headed for like 55, 54 wins, which would be their most since 2013. If they got to 55, it's actually the most since 1997. And then a lot of people just point to both the top of the conference, really top of the sport, that they're 0-9 against the Lakers, Thunder, Cavaliers, and Celtics. And then there's some questions about Tom Thibodeau and how he's run the offense. And you want to talk about, like, you say how the vertical approach, and how, like, your GM needs to be in lockstep with your coach, who needs to be in lockstep with your best player. And that wasn't always true in Sacramento. Could not be more true in New York, where the president of basketball operations, was the coach's agent, was the best player's agent, and, like, godfather. Like, it could not be more in lockstep than like the Leon Rose CAA Villanova connection here. And I guess we'll see what happens. The other angle of this, is we pivot into what's happened to the Kings since the trade of De'Aaron Fox, is just how Zach LaVine has performed in Sacramento. I'm staring at his numbers now. In 14 games, it's 24-4-4 on 52, 41, 90 splits. He's been sensational. And it's why I want to ask you about the lineup data, because when you go to clean the glass, and you, like I said, I all I did was take De'Aaron off and put LaVine on, and just like the one for the other. And there's one really bad lineup that has Sabonis in it, and then there's one really good lineup that has Valanciunas at center. Then you take Sabonis off because the Knicks won't be playing him tonight, I assume. And I said it in the intro, 525 possessions plus 16 with a 125 offensive rating. The defense is pretty good too, a 108.8, really efficient. They force a lot of turnovers. They don't force a lot of turnovers. They don't turn the ball over at all, really, and they get offensive rebounds. Now, I mean, you tell me, like, is it a fair hypothesis to put out there that maybe they're not better without Sabonis, even though they've played better without him? And it's more that, like I just said, they've played better without him. And, like, does the on-court performance reflect the lineup data that I'm staring at?
I think it does. You're getting me into dangerous territory here with Kings fans, but
I know.
I am on your side throughout this process. And honestly, more big picture, I think that, this is somewhat of an example of, hey, maybe you don't need to pay $30 million for a center, and you can distribute that elsewhere. And, some of the classic questions that have existed for Sabonis throughout his career of postseason production. And like I said, I mean, it's just opportunity cost of what you could be paying for a serviceable center in my mind. But I think a big part of that is Zach LaVine and DeMar DeRozan being the guys on this team, and then Malik Monk, which he may come back tonight. Domas is definitely going to be out. Malik is sort of TBD, and we're expecting an update on Domas, but he's definitely expected to be out for tonight's game. They said he'd miss the next two prior to the last one. But I think that one of the things Domas talked about, because I think his best skill is making his teammates better, is as he learned LaVine's tendencies, is one of the things is like, well, he needs the ball in his hands a little bit. Like, it's not a dribble handoff. Hey, LaVine's going to catch off movement and take 1-2 dribbles and then finish. Like, no, he's got to kind of catch a rhythm a little bit. Obviously, Debo falls into the same thing. Last night against the Clippers, it's just like ISO hunting damn near the whole second half. It's where's James Harden? Let me get a ISO here. And they have the talent to do it. But obviously that is different than the Domantas Sabonis style of play, I would say. So I think that there's somewhat of an aspect of Jonas just being an easier adjustment for LaVine to go out there, be himself. You have, the line of too many cooks in the kitchen has been thrown around a lot for this Kings team as of late. And I think that, in the unfortunate circumstances that two of these cooks have been out, that it's kind of helped the other ones a little bit. And you're seeing LaVine definitely get comfortable. At first, he did the typical nice guy getting traded somewhere and trying too hard to fit in. And it's like, no, dude, you got to go out there and get some buckets. It's what you do. And so he's embraced that more. But biggest thing post All-Star break, 5-3, mentioned earlier, 21-11 under Doug Christie, but 8th in defensive rating. And this is for a team that was like bottom 10 for most of the year, if not like right towards the middle at their best moments. But this improvement it's been ridiculous recently. And that's Keon Ellis getting a little bit more run. That's the addition of Jake LaRavia and actually having like size in some lineups. They're going to Trey Lyles at the backup 5, but it's a little different when you have Keegan Murray and Jake LaRavia next to him rather than a guard and Keegan Murray, for example. So Valanciunas' physicality, I think, is playing into a factor there. But I think to answer your original question, it's just easier for some of these new guys to adjust playing alongside a more traditional center. It doesn't need the ball as much like Valanciunas compared to like learning to play next to Domas.
Well, the data certainly reflects that. And look, the jokes were made when the trade was made. Oh, they're just recreating the Bulls.
Yeah.
And people forget that Bulls team when it was DeRozan and DeRozan and Levine together before Lonzo got hurt, like that Lonzo Caruso next to those two forwards. And then I believe that was the Vucevic team. And like that team was on pace that was at the top of the conference for a while. Then some injuries happened. And obviously, Lonzo went through some pretty significant injuries and the whole blueprint fell apart. But that was like a 46, 47 win team that I believe it was a 6 seed and like the playoffs are a thing. But
I will say the Lonzo aspect of that is what's interesting to me with the parallel with the Kings, because he's the elite playmaker, setting guys up specifically for Zach. I think having that is more helpful than obviously DeMar. It's, hey, just let him cook essentially. But the Kings don't have that. They don't even really have a point guard on this team. I guess it's Markelle Fultz if you throw him into that, who's not even playing all that much. But Malik Monk being your primary point guard, like that's not, it's certainly far off from Lonzo Ball.
So then how is it working with Keon Ellis as the point guard? And then you go to like Keegan Murray and you're just going like 3 switchable wings, which switchable being an interesting word to use, but like positionless wings between Levine, DeRozan, and Murray next to the traditional center with Valanciunas.
Yeah, I mean, that's just letting Zach and DeMar be the points, essentially. Last night against the Clippers that they lose in overtime, which we'll see how that factors into tonight's game fatigue-wise. But DeMar DeRozan has a double-double, 10 assists. The game prior, Zach LaVine, I want to say, ends the game with 8 or 9 assists. So it's kind of just leaning on those guys playmaking. And I think that DeMar, obviously, his time with the Spurs is when he really took a step up in that aspect and was pretty much the point guard of that team. I think he's really good at doing it. And Zach's actually impressed me a little bit more. I was kind of down on his passing ability, but nothing insanely flashy, manipulative, or anything like that. This isn't Tyrese. I don't think this is De'Aaron or anything like that. But functions well enough to run the offense through those guys.
Well, you just alluded to it. The Kings just played an overtime game on Sunday night, a pretty heartbreaking loss to the Los Angeles Clippers. The Clippers benefited from playing a New York Knicks team that had a pretty heartbreaking loss to the Lakers the night before when they played the Knicks on Friday. And look, the way the Knicks operate when you have a bunch of guys play 40 plus minutes and you have a back-to-back the next night, if the game went to overtime, is it doesn't matter. Like they're going to play 40 minutes again the next night. Josh Hart played 40 minutes into an overtime game against the Lakers and then played 46 regulation minutes on Friday against the Clippers. So I'm staring at a box score in which DeMar DeRozan played 44, Keegan Murray played 47, Valanciunas played 42, and Zach LaVine played 44. We'll see how much of a factor that plays into this matchup against the Knicks on Monday night and whether fatigue will play a factor. Do you know, I mean, how have they behaved in the past? Not with like resting guys on the second night of a back-to-back, but potentially stretching out the rotation on the second night. Is there anything that we could see in that as a wrinkle?
Yeah, maybe a little bit. Like Devin Carter actually had maybe one of his better performances last night. Rookie that I want to say has not even played 20 games yet in his career, missed the first good portion, more than half of his season with a shoulder surgery that he had coming out of college. I think that you could see a little bit of it, but for the most part, I think they've actually been very Thibodeau. Even like that was very much a thing under Mike Brown. A couple guys top 5 in minutes. That's slowed down a little bit. I think less due to Doug Christie and more due to just getting some actual depth at the trade deadline with, like we mentioned, Valanciunas, LaRavia, Markelle Fultz, and I want to say there's one other. Well, obviously Zach LaVine. So I think that's helped their minutes load in general. But for the most part, these guys are still going to go out there and play for sure.
One thing about the defense getting better, I did have a question about. So the Knicks this year, just their 3-point defense, it's been bad to worse, and specifically to 3-point percentage against. And I've quoted this stat on the pod recently that one of the adjusted or shot quality stats out there, I forget which one, but Fred Katz of The Athletic has said this recently, that the Knicks are just one of the most unlucky teams when it comes to shot quality in the league. They're not allowing a ton of threes a game, but when teams are taking them, they are making them. And I wonder if Tibbs just at some point was like, this is going to revert back. Like, this is going to eventually lead to us like benefiting from it. And it's why like you see a Laker team shoot poorly from three on Thursday. And it's like, great, we've been waiting for this. And the Grizzlies a week ago shoot 4 of 31 from three. And it's like, yes, we were waiting for this, like some type of night where teams don't hit threes. I say this because Knicks fans might be intrigued to hear that while the Knicks are 30th in the league in 3-point percentage against, that means the highest technically 3-point percentage against, the second highest in 3-point percentage against is the Kings. So I ask you, is that still a thorn in their side on defense that teams are just lighting it up from three against them? Or has Doug Christie done anything to potentially improve that over his time as Kings head coach?
Yeah, I mean, I think that there is more ball pressure. I think the stereotypical way you think of Doug Christie as a player, he is implementing to this team a little bit of, more picking up full court. I think that they're just mucking up the game, like forcing turnovers. I think Keon Ellis, he had a 5-steal game the other day, another couple 4-steal games. He's like towards the top of the league in deflections. You're seeing Keegan Murray, I think, be a great defender. That was one of his biggest growth probably this season, and that's continuing to trend in that direction. Physicality from all of the guys, I would say. But there is an aspect of, are they making them or not when it comes to some of that 3-point shooting? And it's not always fun to hear that you're at the short end of the stick when it comes to some of that stuff, but I think that has been the case. And obviously it's also a function of you're allowing a decent amount of good threes from Sacramento's perspective because they don't have much rim protection. So they kind of do it as a unit, and therefore you're leaving more guys open on the perimeter, even helping off like dramatically one pass away. I think that they've slowed down maybe the extent of how much they're doing that to limit some of these easy threes. But I would say for the most part, it's like just getting very handsy and trying to, it makes me think of the Timberwolves a couple of years ago when I want to say it's the first year they got Rudy, or second year, because first year was a total mess, where they were just mucking the game up and turning everybody over and just total chaos. And it's almost like the Kings are trying to be that same aggressive frontline team on the perimeter without having that back line of obviously a security blanket like Gobert, but definitely upping their aggressiveness, I would say, defensively, and trying to make plays on that end.
Well, the other interesting part about the lineup data I was pointing to, where they're so much better without Sabonis, right? Plus 24, plus 18 overall, plus 24 in that new starting five. The thing that does stand out is a rebound percentage of 19, which is the 17th percentile on offense. So they're not getting a ton of offensive boards, but other teams are not getting offensive boards, that they're in the 97th percentile on defense and allowing offensive boards. So overall for the season, because you have Sabonis, this is a top 6 or 7 rebounding team on the defensive end. And that's clearly gotten worse when you look at how teams are beating them on that side of the floor. So I guess my question with the Knicks now, like Josh Hart, a rebound demon, 20 rebounds on Friday night against the Clippers.
Jeez.
And then Mitchell Robinson returning back to the lineup potentially tonight. Does that spell advantage Knicks, that even though like you do have Valanciunas, but because the Kings are basically playing 3 wings and Keon Ellis for the majority of the time, although you said they might go big, could that be a thing that the Knicks use to their advantage tonight, their ability to dominate the boards?
Definitely. I think back to maybe 2 years ago where Josh Hart came in to Golden One Center and had like 12 offensive rebounds or something it was.
Yeah.
And Mike Brown came out post game and talked about how ridiculously unacceptable it was. It was maybe the most frustrated that I've seen Mike Brown. And Domantas Sabonis was on that team, so I think it's definitely something that the Knicks can cause a problem with. DeMar DeRozan, Zach LaVine, not exactly the most disciplined about making sure to put a body on somebody when a shot goes up. I think that definitely plays a factor here. And then especially when the Kings go to their second unit, assuming that they're going to go to Trey Lyles like they have, with not really many other options currently existing at that backup center. And like I mentioned, you'll go Jake LaRavia, you'll go Keegan Murray for some more size out there. Devin Carter actually rebounds the ball really well for a guard. He had more rebounds per game than Donovan Clingan last year in college for what it matters, meaning he'll probably get like 3 in his 8 minutes. So the Kings will try to do it by committee, but I think that size advantage and just it being something that New York clearly emphasizes and is good at, that's definitely an aspect where I think they could have an advantage here.
It's
And for what it's worth, some of the Kings' recent numbers, I think, are a little jaded by the fact that they played Utah, they played Charlotte, they played Dallas. And so, not to knock them, because you have to beat the teams in front of you, and they've had an issue of losing to lesser teams previously, but definitely plays a factor in this 8th in defensive rating post All-Star break.
Yeah, the cleaning the glass stuff can be good, especially the ruling out of garbage time. I do think that you need like a 30-game sample, or at least as far as the possessions go. I like to get to 300 or 400 before I actually make some definitive claims. We are at 300 overall on this no Fox, no Sabonis stretch, though, so we'll see how it is. And look, to your point about the rebounding being a staple, it's why this year's been so fascinating that they trade Randall. They go into the season with Cat, and Cat's been dominating the defensive boards, but they've largely been the antithesis of a Thibodeau team as far as the possession battle is concerned. And now with Mitch back, you're wondering if some of that identity comes back as well, as he ramps up and is made to be allowed to play more. We'll see if that happens tonight. This is where I like to turn over the pod, Brenden, to my guests. See if you have any Knicks questions, Knicks thoughts, any Knicks takes. What do you got as far as the Knicks going into this game?
Yeah, I think I'm going to go a little more broad Eastern Conference with you.
Let's do it.
Like Boston for sure competing, obviously, right? Where are we at with Cleveland, Milwaukee?
Milwaukee, Knicks in 6. It's maybe arrogant of me. They just have dominated drop coverage all year. I haven't seen the Knicks play the version of the Bucks that has Kuzma, but forgive me if that's not me all of a sudden saying, oh no. They do not have an answer for Jalen Brunson. The Knicks, not that they have answers for Giannis, but you do have an Anunoby, you do have the wall that Tibbs likes the shell that Tibbs likes to build when it comes to guys like that. And the 2 games that they've played the Bucks, they've dominated. So until I see them play the Bucks and in those fortunes reverse, I would feel confident going into a matchup like that. So for a while, I had a lot of bad things to say about Cleveland, and it was I got to see it first. And then they keep winning 12 games in a row multiple times. They're on their third 12-plus game winning streak this season. And I was looking up best net ratings ever, and they have the 6th best net rating ever. And the only reason we're not talking about it more is because the Thunder right now have the 2nd best net rating ever. And the only one that's better is the 96 Bulls that won 72 games. Last year's Celtics, I believe, were the 5th best net rating ever, and I'm missing the 3rd and the 4th one. I believe one of them is the 08 Celtics, and then maybe the Warriors from
73 and 9.
Yeah, either the 73 win team or the first year with KD. I can look it up before we get out of here, but at a certain point, you just got to respect that the Cavs might be one of the best regular season teams ever. And I can't go into a matchup with the Knicks, say drop to 4 because Jalen Brunson got hurt and we're looking at the Cavs in the second round instead of the Celtics. I can't go into that series confident. I just can't. And I think the Knicks would have a chance to win. More so of a chance than the Celtics, because the Celtics just seem to have their number. But the Cavs are just going to have to start. I have to start giving them some respect. They feel, I made this reference on Twitter yesterday, but they feel very much like the Eagles, where all season we're oh, it's Jalen Hurts, that's the Eagles, Nick Sirianni, come on. And then, all right, so what? They won all these regular season games. Great. I'll pick Matthew Stafford against. I'll pick Jordan Love against them. You know what? I love this Jaden Daniels team. Look what they did to Detroit. It's Pat Mahomes, and then we're just up there looking at them. Oh, they have the trophy, and you're oh yeah, they're the most dominant football team all season. Got it. And I wonder if that's the Cavs, that we'll be looking at them in the finals being oh yeah, we probably should have said that the 65+ win team is going to be the best team in the conference overall. So
which is fair. And I think that OKC is dealing with something somewhat similar, I guess, probably getting more respect because, like you mentioned, the net rating's even better. Actually, I guess that their record is slightly worse than Cleveland now at this point.
It's one game.
It is 53 and 11 for OKC, 54 and 10 for Cleveland. It's literally one game. But they're clearly, I mean, Cleveland's 8 games ahead of Boston. OKC is 12 games ahead of the Lakers, and those are the 2 seeds. Like,
Yeah,
it is funny to me. Yes, it probably should be talked about as like that. These are clearly the best 2 teams in the league right now.
they're 108 or 107 and wait, so what?
21.
107 and 21 is that
Yeah.
their official records together? And we're all like, can the Lakers Celtics, right? Like,
Right.
yeah, wasn't that going to be the finals? Not
Right.
the 2 teams on pace for like 66 wins each. To close the loop, by the way, the 96 Bulls that won 72 games, best net rating ever. Then you have this year's Thunder. Then the 97 Bulls that won 69 games and lost a chance to get 70 on the last day of the season against the Knicks. Just had to throw that out. They have the 3rd best net rating ever. Then the Warriors, the first year of KD, have the 4th best net rating ever. Then it's last year's Celtics. Then it's this year's Cavs. Then it's the year that the people forget this. The year that the Warriors won 73 games, they had the 2nd best net rating behind the Spurs that year.
Wow.
Yeah, that
Wow.
Spurs team that won 67
That's
games,
crazy.
I believe. Yeah, that Kawhi LaMarcus Aldridge team. It's why like one of the better upsets of that playoffs, aside from the LeBron comeback, was that Spurs team lost to KD and Russ in the 2nd round on a 4. Like, they lost 13 games all year and had a 4-game losing streak to end their season. You know, so
Yeah.
Funny how history forgets the details. Do you have any other Knicks thoughts or questions before we go to
One
the
other
chat?
thing for you before we get out of here is how, now that we're 60 some games into this season, how has the Cat perspective changed? Because he's a guy that I always, I talked to a couple people in Minnesota, and I think one of the things that was always mentioned to me is that like no front office was ever around long enough to sort of grow tired of him, to be honest. That at first it's like super tantalizing. You're like, gosh, this guy can do so much, the size, best shooting big of all time. And then as you have him around more, it's like you start to see some of this defensive stuff that's going on with the Knicks when he's on the floor, right? And I'm just curious, like you can play both sides, right? And so what's the perspective on Cat been up to this point?
So I want to start here from a personal perspective. And obviously I don't know him. We don't get locker room access. So I'm mostly going on the hearsay and the what gets put out there, which may be some PR. But the more I've learned about him, the person, the more I've really like what he stands for, some of the causes that he like. There's a documentary out there. I forget the name of it, but basically he was at the forefront of helping former inmates that had lost their right to vote regain that right to vote in Minnesota. And so him being like an activist, like a good person, makes it really easy to root for him to succeed.
For sure.
So from just a personal standpoint, it's why I think a lot of Knicks fans went to war with Draymond Green the other day, where Draymond alleged that Cat missed the game on Tuesday because he was ducking Jimmy Butler, when the reality is Jordan Woods, his girlfriend, fiance, had just lost someone to cancer. And shocker, Draymond Green talked out of the wrong end of his body. So that I'll just leave that there. On the court, the defensive limitations exist. Tibbs has had his work cut out for him. It's largely been in drop coverage, and it's largely been bad. There are games where teams are missing, and he's now in perfect position because he's backpedaling in drop, and he's like, okay, this is a 14 rebound night for Cat. Then there are games where teams just have like the cleanest of mid-range or pull-up shots because he's not the most aggressive of defenders. He doesn't put his hands up a ton. And as a result, I mean, like, and when he does get aggressive, he's like a guy that doesn't know how to play defense and not foul. So you're stuck with one of your better players in foul trouble. So there are some defensive limitations that are tough to scheme around, which is why I wonder if as Mitchell Robinson gets healthy, they don't just try what Minnesota did and like put him at the 4 and then put Mitch at center and put Josh Hart in the bench and go with the bigger lineup that way. If he's not, all those limitations aside, if he's not also like elite offensively, then it's a problem. For the majority of the season, he has been elite offensively, which leads to more positive than negative, though, which like it's 60 whatever games in, and I think he's going to make an All-NBA team. He started the All-Star game for the Eastern Conference, and I'm very intrigued by whatever the next 3 or 4 years are of Karl Anthony Towns as one of the focal points of a Knicks team that's trying to win a championship. I do think their ceiling got higher with him, and look, there are going to be defensive questions, especially with him sharing the floor with Jalen Brunson, but there are just going to be some offensive nights where you can't stop this team. And a lot of that is because of the spacing he now provides as like a true stretch five, and because of the threat that he is when he has the ball, especially when being guarded by a center. So that's a long answer to say that it's been a very pleasant experience the first year of Karl Anthony Towns. We'll see if like a bad playoff game might change that for a lot of Knicks fans, how fickle fans can be. But as far as I'm concerned, I'm happy to have him in my corner and to be in his,
Yeah, glad to hear it. It's like to your point, it changes very fast, the perspective of these things. But I agree with you. I think he's somebody that I've always enjoyed from the outside as a person. And I mentioned earlier with De'Aaron, a lot of people I feel like being on him for not being something that he never has been. I feel like Cat gets some of the same. But I understand it's a two-way street of you don't want to just be like, oh, this guy is who he is, and then just give him like a free pass for the things he's not good at. But,
right.
Pros and cons. And I feel like it's been the same pros and cons for Cat for a while. So you kind of know what you're getting to an extent.
Definitely here in New York. Definitely throughout his career. And look, this is the true, I think, with all fans that we have a lot of fans have selective memories. I try not to, but I will put myself in that
hard not to
as well. It's hard not to. A couple questions from the chat before we let you get out of here. First, from Don't Bother Me, I'm Busy. How can we get GMAC to start these things on the hour? So normally when Busy says this at the beginning of every show, because they always start at like 01, 02. We started at 04 today. And normally it's because I'm talking to whoever my guest is, or my guest is late. I'm usually here 5 minutes early waiting. Today's my fault. I was in the wrong room. I went to the post-game show room and I left Brenden here waiting. So Busy. This is actually my fault. I enjoy making you wait, though. We're at that point in the stretch where I enjoy making you wait, Busy.
It's okay. I think last time we did this, it was on me. So
there you go. We're even at this point. Next from Ben Kim Gervey. What does your point of attack ball handling harassment defense look like now? How much will it affect subpar and inexperienced ball handlers like Deuce McBride and Campaign, and maybe Tyler Kolek if the Knicks decide to play him?
I hate to be that guy. I think that there are interesting pieces with some of these players. But typically I think if you're relying on this level of depth, that it probably kind of speaks to the talent you have in that aspect. Not that they don't have some good attack and ball handler guys. I realize that I'm totally reading this from the New York perspective. I see the question.
Yeah, he's saying like from the Knicks perspective, because they don't have Brunson. Like, is it advantage Kings that Keon Ellis is now going to be available to guard either the Knicks lesser point guards or starting either lesser point guards or like putting Keon on like Mikal Bridges or something tonight?
Yeah, got you. Sorry, I think my internet cut out for half a second there.
You're good. You're good.
But yeah, I would say that Keon definitely is a guy that is, sort of top of the league in my eyes. I think that he can pick up full court. He's not the most physical defender, but he's super handsy, right? He's a long player when it comes to wingspan, just a disruptor, a guy that's going to totally go out there and, like I said, muck up the game. He's towards the top of the league in deflections. I think the Kings do that well as a whole. Keegan Murray, I think, would be more of your like physical size defender, and he defends anything from 1 to 4, sometimes 5, even at times. They put him on Jokic the other day to start their game against Denver. So you have that versatility there, and that's about where it starts. If you really wanted to get into the weeds of Devin Carter and Markelle Fultz, you'll probably see about 10 minutes of those guys combined tonight. And hey, maybe Devin will keep up some of his positive momentum from last night. But I think for the most part, Keon Ellis is towards the top of the league in that aspect. And I think that Keegan Murray does a great job with that stuff as well. So, forcing turnovers and getting out in transition, I think has been an important aspect of, winning the possession battle. Obviously a common topic over there with Tibbs for sure. But I think that Keon definitely plays into that pretty well.
Last question from JRose712. Is there a long-term plan for LaVine, or is he mainly a trading piece to use in upcoming trades?
I am so unsure what the long-term plan of this team is in general, to be honest. You saw in that Athletic article probably that their Domantas Sabonis has questions about what the future of this organization looks like. We'll see what that means for this offseason. I would be surprised if both Monty McNair and Wes Wilcox were back for this front office coming this offseason. I think that at least one of them, there will be some change there, if not both. Doug Christie probably sticks around, but that is still a question mark, I think. And so with so many uncertainties, I think it's hard to answer, but LaVine is probably the one I feel most confident. Like, all right, he's going to be around for a while. It's like, I don't have the number off the top of my head, but he's getting paid like nearly 50 million, if not more, over these next 2 seasons. Second year's a player option. You'd imagine he's going to pick that up. But the way that he's been playing and he's been healthy throughout most of this year, like when everybody was talking about this contract as if it was like some horrible thing, it's when he had all his injuries. Like when he's playing at the level he's playing at right now, you went through some of the numbers earlier. This guy shoots the lights out of the ball. He can put up 30 like it's nothing. And so, not an albatross of a contract like I think it once was looked at, but it's also not hard for it to get back to that point. And I'm certainly not saying it's a great deal. I think it's just something that the Kings will probably be stuck with for a little while. And if they were to include a piece in an upcoming deal this offseason, I think DeMar DeRozan is the more likely one.
It's 1+1, right? He has 1 year and then an option for a player option for a second year if he'd like to, which look, I have no idea what trade value is anymore. Julius Randle was 1+1, and I think everybody thought he was going to opt out, which is why the Timberwolves were like, great, flexibility. And now Julius is absolutely picking up that option, and they're probably going to lose Naz Reid to free agency because certain teams will have cap space instead. I do think LaVine's value is up now, though. So if that's at least a positive from the Kings' perspective, that you traded for a player that is shooting 50, 40, 90 right now since coming there, that's definitely a positive. And look, they sit at 9th in the West, which ironically they're fighting it out with the Clippers, who they just lost to, and Julius Randle's Minnesota Timberwolves for that 7th or 8th spot. So we'll see what happens. One thing Zach LaVine has also done very well this year is play against the Knicks. In his 2 games against the Knicks this year, he's averaging 32 points, 6 rebounds, 8 assists on 76 true shooting in the 2 games with the Bulls. He's 7 of 14 from 3 this season against the Knicks. So we'll see if that continues with a new club in Sacramento tonight. Brenden, thank you so much, as always, for joining me to preview this matchup between the Knicks and the Sacramento Kings. Before you get out of here, please let the fine folks at home know where they can find you and all of your work.
Yeah, absolutely. Appreciate it as always, Andrew. SactownSports.com for any sort of written stuff, and it's at Brenden Nunes NBA on whatever social platform. But yeah, don't expect Zach LaVine to slow down. I think he's top 5 in 3-point percentage on the year. So it's kind of what he does.
Great. Can't wait. Yeah, no matter who guards him, usually he lights it up. Although, look, the smallest of silver linings or advantages that the Knicks now get is that they would only have 1 poor defender on the floor with Cat, and potentially their defense is better. It was much better on Friday night when they played the Clippers. I miss Jalen Brunson, though, so I clearly don't care about whether or not they have an extra defender out there. Deuce McBride, love you. Wish you played more. Believe me, I very much miss Jalen Brunson. So we'll see what happens against the team that is on fumes. This Kings team on Monday night after an overtime loss to the Clippers. Why did I not just make that connection? Both teams just lost to the Clippers, are trying to rebound from losses to the Clippers. Why didn't I wrote all these notes down, Brenden. I didn't make that note. Oh, these are 2 teams that both lost to the Clippers. So
it's too simple to piece together, you know?
Yeah, I knew they just played the Clippers. I obviously know the Knicks just played the Clippers, and I didn't make that connection. Okay, thank you, Brenden, as always, for joining me. It is so good to see you, and thank you, everybody, for tuning in to another edition of the Knicks Film School pregame show. If you dug it, please head over to iTunes, drop a 5-star rating and a review. I'll be back on Wednesday to preview the Knicks matchup against the Portland Trailblazers. But until next time, thank you for listening. Thank you for watching. Enjoy the game tonight, and I'll speak with you soon. Peace.